Hi, here is my Aliens Life on Mars project, where I asked the big question, if is there life on Mars? And pretty much this experiment is me answering that question. I'll go and start. My big question was, is there life on Mars? I wanted to know, that's something I'm sure a lot of people wonder, and I was wondering too, is there life on Mars? So my hypothesis was, if there's life on Mars, they would have had lived through a climate change that froze everything on the planet. Any living organisms would have lived through freezing temperatures to still be alive on Mars. So that's pretty much saying, Mars, in my research, I found that Mars, scientists believe that when they have found ice through rovers, and so they believe that water may have flowed in rivers and streams all over Mars, and that Mars had an ocean that covered over 19% of the land. So that was very important. And I also found that there was a meteorite that landed on Earth from Mars, and scientists found possible signs of life in the meteorite. And also, that ignited a scientific controversy that lingers to this day. Is there life on Mars? That's aliens. Are aliens real? Just picture that in your head, just thinking of if aliens are real, what would be like. Next I have my experiment was to take microorganisms from a science class organisms kit, any growable or living microorganisms through a science class organisms kit. I was going to take them, grow them from using bacteria from teeth, a toilet seat, and a keyboard. So pretty much everyday bacteria on Earth. And I heated them up in my lamp. Down here you can kind of see that. One of the pictures. I had to heat them up in my lamp for about 2 days to have them grow enough to where I could freeze them. So pretty much Mars had a big old climate change that froze everything on the planet. And the climate change was just a spread of temperatures of negative 63 degrees Fahrenheit. I found that in my research. So pretty much all the water is frozen. So dry ice has an average temperature of negative 78 degrees, and it's made up of mainly carbon dioxide. And on Mars, Mars is mainly, it's around 99% all carbon dioxide. So that was another big variable in my experiment. So I grew the microorganisms, and then I placed them in a tub. I grew them till they would be visible to the eye, and then I froze them with dry ice, and I put them in a freezer overnight to see how that would affect them, because I can't do a year-long experiment, because on Mars that climate change is still happening. So another thing with the experiment, I would have to see what they look like immediately after, so I could look and see how they would be frozen, because they're gonna obviously be exposed to my room temperature and everything. So that was another big thing. And so I took the same exact microorganisms and I kept them under my lamp to see if they would keep growing, how they would be affected, so I can compare those at the end. I can compare them to the original that I froze, and then see the differences and see if they are alive and if they're not alive, so that can pretty much be a smaller answer of if there's life on Mars. Pretty much in a way of saying if Mars was like Earth, so what happened on Mars happened to Earth, pretty much another ice age on Earth. But just microorganisms, no other living animals or creatures. So in my materials list, I had to use a camera, microorganisms, Tupperware, stopwatch, and thermometer, and also dry ice. So I just used a stopwatch on my computer. I just used a normal iPhone camera, dry ice from Publix, and a normal little chicken thermometer that you put in your chicken when you're cooking it. So, yeah. And then here I have my pictures and my results. So you can see the first pictures I have of all the microorganisms at the beginning. They're black and white, so you can't really see. This is me putting some of the microorganisms in the dry ice. That is what they looked like originally, and that is what they look like in my lab. Actually, I believe, so this is what, these two are the frozen ones, and these two are not. So if they were in color, you could see them a lot better, but there was like nothing left on these slides. And this, you could see that. So there's nothing on these slides. So let me get to that now. So in the data, I have the qualitative data in my research, which qualitative is having to do with conditions or qualities. So the qualitative variable is how the bacteria is affected by the low temperatures, such as if they survive the cold temperatures or if they don't survive the cold temperatures. And the quantitative variable, which is quantitative having to do with numbers, is the amount of bacteria that will survive. So if like one bacteria survives or 50,000 survives. And so the independent variable, which is the variable that the researcher can change, is the temperature that I will place microorganisms in. So I will place them in a negative 78 degrees environment with all carbon dioxide, frozen solid carbon dioxide, pretty much dry ice. And the dependent variable, the variable that results from the independent variable, will be how the low temperatures will affect them, if they'll pretty much survive or not. Same thing almost as the qualitative. Yeah. So I conducted my experiment, and I did not necessarily predict at all what would happen. I thought that the microorganisms would live, proving to me that there is life on Mars, that if Earth went through like the same thing as Mars, pretty much in my experiment I was answering if Earth pretty much went through a very large ice age, killing everything, beings, creatures, if Earth went through another ice age of like negative 60 degrees, like Fahrenheit, how that would affect our like life, pretty much. So Mars was like Earth, so they're pretty much the same. So saying that putting these microorganisms in the same exact environment as Mars, the negative 78 degrees, the all carbon dioxide, that pretty much can prove how that would affect the microorganisms. So what happened, my conclusion was that when I took the bacteria out, I found that there was no further growth from the start, that they pretty much all just stopped growing and died, pretty much. Like the freezing temperatures froze, meaning that everyday bacteria on Earth cannot live through a climate change that of Mars, meaning there is no life on Mars because it would have lived through a climate change that would have killed it all. So pretty much 3 different microorganisms, and none of them survived my experiment. So that pretty much proves to me that there's no way that there can be life on Mars with the climate and everything on Mars. So what I learned is that the bacteria can have no further growth in a freezing environment. So that means there's no life on Mars. So that was the big answer to my experiment, not the answer. I thought the microorganisms were going to live, continue to grow, maybe continue to grow, but possibly live. But they didn't. They all died. So that proves to me that there is no life on Mars. Thank you.